Atlanta Authors Series event featuring Carolyn Curry talking about her new book, Trudy's Awakening, a historical fiction novel set in Atlanta in the years following the Civil War. We're very excited to also have Carolyn's husband, football legend Bill Curry, right here in the audience. Welcome, Bill. And so my name is Deanna Smith. I am with Atlanta Authors, and I'll be your host for today's program. It's a pleasure to have you all here. In fact, I think I see some familiar faces from last week's event. We were here just last Saturday doing an author event here, so welcome back to those of you who attended last week, and also to the fans of Carolyn Curry, who I know follow her everywhere, so welcome. Atlanta Authors has been holding author events at the Roswell Library and the Cultural Arts Center right across the street here, and the Adult Recreation Center right down the street, and virtually for the last 16 years. And the list of more than 70 authors that we have is impressive, as you can see. Yeah, we have had some really great authors over the years. I want to thank the Atlanta Authors Committee members. If you would please stand, committee members. That would include myself, Marilyn Barron, Lou Conti, Debbie Weiss, Diane Stevenson, our tech lady, Kathy Chiaffi, our PR person in the back there, George Weinstein with the Atlanta Writers Club, Judy Stanton, and also the owner of our favorite local bookstore, the book miser herself, Annelle Gerson. Yay! We all love Annelle and Book Miser. Atlanta Authors is a program sponsored by the Friends of the Roswell Library in partnership with the City of Roswell and Book Miser. We could not hold these programs without their unwavering support. We also appreciate additional support from the Friends of the East Roswell Library, our partner library just down the street. Now you can join Friends of the Roswell Library and the East Roswell Library and get 3 extra months as a sponsor. So buy 12, get 3 extra months. So there's flyers out on the table where you signed in, and I think it's, $10 to be a friend, and you can join for more if you want, but it's very reasonable, and if you get on their mailing list, they have lots of really great book sales and stuff, and every dollar they get from these book sales and from your memberships help support programs for children and adults here at the library. So we appreciate your support. And through its Atlanta Authors and Roswell Reads programs, Friends of the Roswell Library offers community reading, author discussions, and lifelong learning opportunities. Friends of the Roswell Library is funded by yearly sponsorships as well from the proceeds from its bookstore, book sales, and if you haven't been to their little bookstore over here, it's great. On your way out, just stop in the bookstore. They have great deals on used books. They are, I'll get to that in a minute. They are having a book sale coming up. They are supported by its sales at a bookstore, book sales, and sales at its booth at City Antiques. So if you're down at City Antiques, take a look at their little booth there. Sponsorships run on a calendar year, but you can join for an extra 3 months of benefits, as the sponsorship will run until December of 2026. So let's see what else we have. And Roswell Reads on January the 10th of 2026, they will feature Paula McLean, New York Times bestselling author of The Paris Wife, discussing her new novel, Skylark, at the Cultural Arts Center. So that's right across the street here. If you need more information, you can go to their website, roswellreads.com. On February 23rd of 2026 at 6 p.m. at the Roswell Cultural Arts Center, Atlanta Authors, in cooperation with Roswell Roots, will be hosting Tara Shelton Harris, Target's first author of the year, talking about her new book, Where the Wildflowers Grow. So that sounds like a very interesting program as well. Good news, Atlanta Authors is now on Facebook and Instagram if you do any of that. Sign up to learn more or register for upcoming author events via those venues. We also have a website, so check us out at AtlantaAuthorsGA.com. And if you'd like to revisit any past author presentations that you enjoyed or check out ones you might have missed, you can find us our YouTube channel under Atlanta Authors. And we have a lot of recorded past authors there. And if you sign up with your email here, we'll get you on our mailing list and send you out reminders when these events come up. So signed or personalized copies of Carolyn's novels are available for purchase right outside that back door there. So after this event, Carolyn will be happy to sign your books. Also, her husband will have books out there as well, Bill Curry's books. You can also buy books, both their books at Book Miser, which is located at 3822 Roswell Road. However, I believe they are currently under a brief hiatus until they reopen due to smoke damage and a fire next door. So she'll tell you a little bit more about that when Annelle comes up here. And we also have a Friends of the Roswell Library book sale. We have flyers from the East Roswell Library flyers. Now this does not happen until February, but I'm telling you, this is the best book sale of the year. If y'all have been to the East Roswell book sale before, the last day of the book sale, they have $5 bags of books. So it's a really wonderful book sale and really great selection. And it's over by Chamberlain Chocolates, if you know where that is. That's where they hold their book sale, not at the library. So check out that flyer. And before we introduce today's author, please silence or turn off your cell phones. Thank you for that. And now to introduce our guest author today and update you about what's happening at Book Miser, I'd like to introduce Annelle Gerson.
Yay!
Although I really don't need one because I have one of those teacher voices that can really project. But here we go. So thank you everyone for coming out today. It's a beautiful November day. I know there are a lot of places that you could be and you chose to be here. So we thank you for the privilege of your time. Actually, I am honored to introduce today's guest author, Dr. Carolyn Newton Curry, award-winning author, honored historian, and respected humanitarian. One who doesn't just say, somebody needs to do something about that, but instead someone who actually does something about that. In fact, in 2002, Carolyn founded Women Alone Together, a 501c3 nonprofit foundation providing education, inspiration, and opportunities for friendship to women who, for whatever reason, found themselves alone in life. She directed the organization for 22 years, impacting the lives of hundreds, if not thousands, of women. So thank you. And it has been one of the highlights of my life, being on book tours the past few years with Carolyn and Bill. They have so many amazing stories to share. So as I go along in my introduction, I'm just going to do this. And that means there's a story there. So if she doesn't tell you the story in her talk, remember and ask her in the Q&A. So Carolyn grew up in Atlanta, College Park, in fact, where she first met Bill in the 4th grade. She was the head cheerleader, and he played football. They got married their junior year of college, finished their degrees the following year, Carolyn graduating from Agnes Scott, which she will tell you was an experience that changed her life, with a degree in English, and Bill from Georgia Tech, which clearly was an experience that changed his. But Carolyn's curiosity and love of learning never quelled, and she went on to earn both a master's and a PhD in history from Georgia State University. In fact, her first book, Suffer and Grow Strong, The Life of Ella Gertrude Clanton Thomas, 1834 to 1907, was born from her PhD thesis research and was formally published in 2014. For her outstanding work on this book, in 2014, she received the Award for Excellence in Research by the Georgia Historical Records Advisory. In 2015, Suffer and Grow Strong was selected one of the books all Georgians should read by Georgia Center for the Book. And that same year, she received the Georgia Author of the Year Award from the Georgia Writers Association. So many stories to tell about that book and that journey. Her second book, Sudden Death, was published in 2022, but was scribed on yellow pads 20 years before it was published. Wow. Sudden Death is a behind-the-scenes mystery based on the life of football families and scary situations, including death threats. Yes, death threats that football families receive. Today, we celebrate Trudy's Awakening, where Carolyn revisits Ella Gertrude Clanton Thomas, this time in a historical setting, poignantly shedding light on the lives of three 19th century Georgia women whose lives intermingle as they work to overcome society's barriers to their progress, to their success, to their careers, and to their very freedom. When not writing, Carolyn is mom to her 2 grown children and Grandma Yeye to 7 grandchildren. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Carolyn Newton Curry.
Wow, I wish you could introduce me every time. Can't beat that intro. I'm going to try to perch myself here, and then I might end up standing up quite a bit. There you go. This is wonderful, and I want to say ditto to what Annelle said, because you all could all be out in the sunshine, but you're here, and I know you've heard that in our country, fewer and fewer people are reading, and that is such a shame, because you know, as Thomas Jefferson said, I cannot live without books, and I'm sure many of you feel the same way. But writers, we really are thankful for our book clubs and our library and friends of the library and people that are really supporting writers. Thank you very much. And to our booksellers like Annelle, who devote their careers to promoting writers and selling books, and we really, really appreciate you. So thank you, thank you. And I thank my husband, Bill, who's my photographer during these events. I'm always... That's a reminder. One time I was speaking at the History Center, and he had forgotten to take any pictures, so I said, and people were wondering, what in the world is she doing with her fingers? You know. But when you write books, your publicist tells you, promote them, make pictures, go on Instagram and Facebook. So as I told someone earlier, I first very much resisted that. I said, I'm a very private person. I don't do Instagram and Facebook. And they said, oh, you must, you must. So for now, over 10 years, I've been learning how to do Instagram and Facebook. And before, outside, we did the cutest reel. You'll have to go to Dr. Carolyn Curry. That's my Instagram handle or whatever they call that. And we did a reel, and I was holding all of these books because a man named Richard Seegers, who was in the 1st grade with Bill, called yesterday and said, I want to buy 14 of Carolyn's books. And we were, you know, anybody that wants to buy 14 of your books, you really get excited. And so we made a little reel of talking about Richard buying 14 of books and him being one of Bill's classmates in 1st grade. And we had a lot of fun with that. And Bill was saying, he's here today because Georgia Tech doesn't play football until tonight. So be glad that Georgia Tech's not playing right now. But as I say, we are having a lot of fun with this book. My book launched on September the 2nd, and I can't even remember how many events we've done, but Bill has gone to all of them, and Nell has gone to almost all of them, and we have had a lot of fun, and we will continue going. We're going to be at Johns Creek on the 15th. Give a little plug for Johns Creek's Festival. And then, of course, there's a wonderful luncheon that Mercer University Press does in September at the Intercontinental Hotel, if you've never been to that. Did I say, okay, December. You can look that up. It's a wonderful event, too. So, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my writing career and a story that I have not told. And Nell, I've got a new story for you. And Nell has heard me speak so many times, but I graduated from Agnes Scott with a degree in English, and I had some wonderful professors there. Then Bill and I got married while we were in college, and then we moved around the country because he was playing and coaching football, and we had the football gypsy life. And then I got really interested in history, women's history, because of a series on public television. It's an old series about the wives of Henry VIII. And you remember the little expression, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. The 6 wives of Henry VIII. And I just could not believe, how did this happen? How did these women have no rights? And how was their only value to him if they were only valuable if they could produce a male child? And so I started taking history courses at Georgia State when my children started Montessori school, because Bill was gone all the time, and I wanted to do something meaningful. And I loved history, and I was going to figure out what had happened to women through the years. Well, when I got in graduate school, I was horrified that the women had been left out of the history books. I really looked at an American History 101 history, and there were about 5 pictures in there of women in American history. Now you can guess who they were. Martha Washington, Dolly Madison, Pocahontas, Madame Curie, and there was one line that said women were given the vote in 1920. Well, you know, that's not right. So I decided that I was going to devote my career to finding the women and putting them in the history books, talking about women. Yes. And that's what I've done. And so I was taking courses. I started taking one course at a time, then I got my master's, and I got my PhD. And when it was time to do my dissertation, I told my advisor, John Matthews, I'm going to write a biography of a Georgia woman that nobody knows anything about. And he said, good luck. Why? Because women were private. Women stayed in the background. They were not in secondary sources. He said, you're going to have to find letters and diaries, and it's not going to be easy. But I've got to give credit to John's wife, Linda, who worked at the Woodruff Library for Emory, and she's the one who knew about a Georgia woman named Ella Gertrude Clanton Thomas, who kept a journal for 41 years. Can you imagine keeping a journal for 41 years? Before, during, and after the Civil War. Now, it was very fashionable for women to keep diaries back then. They didn't have TV. They didn't have telephones. They had a lot of time. And it was just something that women did. They kept journals. And she did a magnificent job. He said, but if you want to see this, you're going to have to go to Duke, because it's never been published. And I said, well, I'll go to Duke. So I made the trek, went into the Perkins Library and put on the white gloves, and they began bringing out the diary, the journals of Gertrude Thomas that she kept for 41 years. It was 13 volumes, 450,000 words. It was unbelievable. And to make a long story short, I was able to purchase a typed manuscript of that journal. It was very hard to read, but a professor in South Carolina, I think she wanted to do what I ended up doing, but bless her, she passed away before she had a chance. But she had graduate students copy the journal and make it accessible. So historians have been going to look at the diary to find out what happened in the battles, to find out what happened when Sherman came. That's what they were using the journal for. But no one had ever written the biography of the woman who had written the journal. So that's what I undertook. So I took the journal back home, and they recommended that I get in touch with her daughter, great-granddaughter, let me get my time straight, who lived in Atlanta. Her name was Gail Despo. And I said, okay. So I cold called this woman. And I said, I want to write a biography of your great-grandmother. And she didn't know me from Adam. I said, may I come see you? So I went to see her. Come to find out, her son was going to Georgia Tech. And Bill was the Georgia Tech coach. That was good. And then, amazingly, her cousin was my 7th grade teacher, Miss Miller. And I had worked really hard for Miss Miller, so I had another in with her. And guess what? She had 15 scrapbooks her great-grandmother had kept. And when I say scrapbook, it's not like we think of scrapbooks. It was newspaper articles she had written, or newspaper articles that had been written about her, or articles about who was the president or something that she was just interested in. But they were magnificent. And since she trusted me, she said, why don't you take these home with you? So I took this huge box of scrapbooks home with me and kept them for months and pored over them. And then I realized from all this work I was going to have to go to Augusta, because there was so much litigation after the war, and where her family was fighting over the money that was left, and she was being sued by her relatives. So I went into the old City Hall down there, courthouse, and you pull the old dusty leather-bound books off the shelf, and they're handwritten minutes of the Superior Court. And I found out, and I read the minutes where her oldest son had sued her, where her brothers and sisters had sued her. And you see, after the war, when everybody needed money, her husband had borrowed money from any relative that had money, and then when he couldn't pay it back, they sued. And so there's all this stuff going on. There was such a treasure of information. And I learned in all of that research that I did for years that Ella Gertrude Clanton Thomas had been born into one of the wealthiest families in Georgia. Her father at his death, he owned 12,000 acres of land. He had 6 plantations, and he had enslaved 400 people. He had warehouses in the city of Augusta. He had rental property, and he had stocks and bonds. It was just astounding. And he sent his daughter to Wesleyan. Anybody here from Wesleyan? Nobody here from Wesleyan. Well, you know, Wesleyan in Macon was the first college established in America solely for women. And Gertrude graduated there in 1851. And she was very proud of her education. And then she got married the next year, and she said, that is when my troubles began. She married Jeff, who had graduated from Princeton, but he had a hard time figuring out what he wanted to do. He liked to take little sips of whiskey from the flask, ended up with a serious drinking problem in his life. But her main problem was giving birth and then having the babies die. She gave birth to 10 children and had 4 of them die. And I have said this many times, I think she leaves us the best record of what women suffered in childbirth in the 19th century, because she pours her emotions into the journal, and she talks about the anguish and what happened, and the babies would get a fever, and they didn't know what was wrong, and she would call the doctor in, Dr. Eve, and he didn't know what was wrong, and the baby would die only days later. She had one baby die at only a few days old, and then she had one die at about 6 months, and they'd really gotten attached. She had one child that died at the age of 7. So women were suffering and grieving the death of their children all the time. And then they stayed pregnant almost all their life, as long as they had the capacity to have babies. And Gertrude was pregnant the same time her mother was pregnant. And her mother had 11 babies and had 4 of them die. So it was taught by the families and by the churches and everything, women were to be fruitful and multiply. You still had that coming at you. And women were not to have professions, and women didn't need to go to college. And she had to really beg to go to college because she loved to read, she loved to write, but her mother thought it was bad for her. You know, they used to believe that it would hurt your reproductive organs if you read too much. So I don't know if you women are in trouble here. But this was true. And but the secret of Gertrude was she was always asking questions. And you see it in her journal. She asked questions. Why is it like this? And when you read Trudy's Awakening, she becomes a historical fiction character. She's 65 years old in this book, but you will hear her asking her father questions about slavery. Like, do you really believe that God condones slavery? Because there's so many verses in the Bible that tell people how to treat their slaves, and slaves, how they are to behave. And the Southern slave owners took that as proof that slavery was good. And so she asks questions. She keeps reading. She wants to read all sides of issues. And she's growing. And one thing that I loved about her is that she was able to change her mind about things. You know, you're born into a culture that tells you one thing. But if you've got a good mind and you ask questions and you read a lot, and she begins to think, I don't know if this is right or not, but it takes a lot of courage. And that's what she did all of her life. So this book takes place, as I say, when she is 65 years old. And I know that Gertrude really lived. I know everything about this woman. I know more about her than I know any other human being in my, I know more than I know about Bill. I mean, I just have devoted years and years to her. And I know that her portrait was painted when she was 65 years old. And she was painted by a young artist named Lizzie Jeter. And I know that because I own the portrait. We'll tell you that story later. But I thought, after I had published my first book, for years my publicist kept saying, why don't you do a young adult novel about Gertrude? Well, I tried, but I just didn't want to tell her story the same way again. And then a friend suggested, why don't you have Gertrude tell her story to the artist, Lizzie, while she's painting her portrait? So that was the first suggestion that I had for the format of this book. So I call her Trudy here. How do I know she's Trudy? I got it from the journal. Because one time after emancipation and the slaves are beginning to get rowdy and a group of young men are threatening violence out in the countryside, and Gertrude set them down. She always talked to the enslaved people, the young men and women, and had close interaction with them. She set them down and she said, no, don't threaten violence. If you start to get violent, people are going to retaliate and people are going to die. No, that's not wise. And this young black man said, why, Miss Trudy, you'd make a good soldier. You're not afraid. So most of her journal was in the first person. But when she quoted somebody calling her Miss Trudy, that's how I learned she was Trudy. And she was wise, and she had grown mature when he was calling her Miss Trudy. So she's Trudy in this book. So Lizzie Jeter is painting her portrait. And when I got the portrait, which there was an appraisal that was about this thick that came with it. And I learned from census figures that were in the appraisal that the artist was only 26 years old. And I learned that her father had died recently, and the young artist was supporting her mother, her sister, and her sister's baby. And she had just opened an art gallery in Grant Park. And I said, this is stress. She had a lot on her. She didn't expect her father to die. She didn't expect to have to support her family. And she didn't know if she could make it. And after all, women were not supposed to have professions. And she was trying to make it as a professional artist. She is my second character. My third character, another woman who actually lived, was an enslaved woman. I learned about her from the journal because when you begin to read it, Gertrude talks about everybody in the family, her sister Anne, her sister Kate, her sister Cora, and she talks about cousin Emily, and she talks about Amanda. And I know who the relatives are, but I'm saying, who's Amanda? And I figured out Amanda was enslaved. But she was a constant companion with the white children. And you know that has happened. They grew up together. She probably lived in her room as a companion. And I know that they had interaction when her babies died. I know Amanda was there. Amanda's mother was enslaved to the family, and I know she was a master seamstress. So I'm saying, what is the bond between Trudy and Amanda? And I know that they were close for many, many years until after the war. And then Amanda disappeared. What happened to Amanda? And Trudy used to worry about her. I wish I knew what had happened to Amanda. Did she make it? Because the former slaves left with nothing. Maybe the clothes on their back and one or two possessions, but they didn't have anything. And they had to have food and lodging and find a way to make it. So I said, how did Amanda make it? So I know she really lived. I know Lizzie really lived. I don't know everything that they did, but I understand the times, and I have some tidbits. So I created a life for Amanda and Amanda and Lizzie. I already knew everything about Trudy. So I weave these women's lives together, and they meet again in 1899 in Atlanta. How do they come together? What brings them together? That's what you'll have to read about. And I do know that this brave woman in 1899 was elected president of the embryonic suffrage movement in Georgia. Now, how many of you have ever studied the suffrage movement in Georgia? Never in our history books, never mentioned. Well, we were 50 years behind the North. 50 years behind the North. And you know, we usually say the first Women's Rights Convention in the North was 1848 in Seneca Falls, New York. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, they gathered in a little church in Seneca Falls, near Ithaca, but in Seneca Falls, and they were afraid to conduct the meeting themselves. They had to have a man. James Mott, Elizabeth Mott's husband, conducted the meeting because a woman did not stand up in public and speak. So the women starting the suffrage movement had to overcome that, and they had to get the courage to finally stand up and speak. And in the South, it was much worse. Gertrude describes in her journal, a woman stood up in the church in Augusta one time and spoke, and the people were so outraged. It was just unbelievable that a woman would stand up and express her opinion. And it all goes back to that verse in the Bible, let the women keep silent in the churches, for if they want to know anything, let they ask their husbands at home, for it is shameful for women to speak in church. But that's a whole nother lecture right there. But at any rate, I want you to understand that we were late starting. It started in Columbus, Georgia in 1890, and a small group of women met in Columbus, and then finally they began to spread around the state, and they have the first convention in 1899, and 90 women came to Atlanta from around the state, and they elected Ella Gertrude Clanton Thomas as their president that first time they met in convention. So that was a very important happening in Gertrude's life, and something that she should be remembered for. Susan B. Anthony had come to Atlanta in 1895 for the convention, and the Atlanta Journal had said, "We welcome these people from around the country. We extend Southern hospitality, but women do not need the vote. They are protected by their husbands." And that was the tradition, that in the 19th century, women had no rights. They were protected by their husbands' rights, supposedly. That comes from English common law, that a woman was covered, film covert. She was covered by her husband's rights. And when a woman married a man, everything she owned became her husband's. Her clothes, her jewelry, any property she had, and even the children she gave birth to. She did not have guardianship rights of her children. They could be willed away from her. She could not sue, she could not be sued, she could not make a contract. Of course, she couldn't serve on a jury, and she could not vote. So when we hear about the suffrage movement, it's not just for the vote. It's for the whole package. And that's the beginning. And those women that were meeting in 1895 and 1899 in Atlanta were talking about all these things. But it was embryonic. It was just in the beginning. And Gertrude, when she was elected president, I have to tell you this was in the Atlanta Journal. She stood up in that convention and she said, "Woman was not taken from the head of man, she's not his superior. Woman was not taken from the foot of man, she's not his inferior. But woman was taken from the side of man, and there she should stand, his equal in the work of the world." And that was 21 years before women got the vote. Wow. And that's how progressive this woman was. This was how far ahead of her time she was. So I have been fascinated by her for 40 years. I have written 2 books about her. We have her portrait hanging in our foyer. Bill talks to her every now and then. So she has become a part of our life, but it's been a great joy to me. And as I say, I admire her for her resilience, her courage, for her sharing her stories and her emotions. She was not afraid to show them, and she wanted to help other women. And that's such an important part of this story, women helping women. And the other thing that I have admired so much about her is that she could change her mind about things. She could mature, she should grow, she could transition. And so she is continually interesting to me, and I hope she will be to you too. Thank you.
So we're going to have questions. So who has questions?
How did you come to own this fabulous?
Everybody asks that question, and it's a great story. Okay, when I was doing research on Gertrude in the beginning, I went to visit her great-granddaughter, and her great-granddaughter had a portrait of her great-grandmother that was painted the week she got married. And this is the picture that's on the cover of my book. And when Gail Despo died, it went to her son, and he was in Easley, South Carolina, and I went up to see him and visit with him, and he treasured the portrait also, and he has recently donated it to Wesleyan. Okay, I knew there was another portrait of her that was painted in 1899 because I visited great-granddaughter. I'm sorry, I don't even remember her name at the moment, but she was cleaning out her attic, and she just had it up against the wall. And it was not in good shape. It needed to be cleaned, and the frame was sort of dusty, not dusty, chipped. And so I could tell that it was not particularly a treasure to her, but she ended up putting it on eBay. And we have a dear friend that Bill worked, he's a former player of Bill's as an attorney, and he discovered it. And he got in touch with Bill, and Bill and Pete bought it and surprised me.
Oh my God.
And this is when you look at the book in the back, I'm standing in front of the portrait in our foyer, and I had to get it cleaned. I had to have the gold leaf frame restored. And I spent so much money on it that Bill is not sure he should have bought it for me. I don't know how much they spent on buying it, but it got pretty expensive to get it cleaned up, restored. But it's a beautiful portrait, and this whole book then is about the painting of that portrait. And these two women are talking, and she goes back and forth between 1899 and she goes back to 1848, 1851, 1870. It goes back and forth the way we do. Anyway, that's how I got the painting. Uh-huh.
Was Trudy an abolitionist?
Oh, well, yes, at the end of her life she was. She made a very famous statement. She said, "I believe all women are abolitionists at heart," meaning she was talking about how the white slave owners abused their slaves and gave birth to mulatto children, especially girls. They were called fancy girls because they were light complected, and they would sell them. And she was so appalled that these babies, a man would give birth to a child and he knew it was his child, but a biracial child, and they would sell them. And she says, and she was so appalled by that she gets more and more outraged when she sees, and she says, "I think that slavery does more harm to our men than to our slaves." In other words, she saw men being so immoral that, and she writes a lot about it. And I must say that I've read other journals about other women, and she is far more progressive and outspoken than any other journalist that I've ever read, because some of the journalists were always bitter. You know, they're still fighting the Civil War. Her husband, Gertrude's husband, is still fighting the Civil War. You know, he probably has PTSD, but he bought a substitute and came home after 9 months, but still, he just couldn't get over the fact they had lost the Civil War. He kept fighting it. And that, of course, lived on in the South forever. And still, some people still fighting the Civil War.
I'm curious how you knew about Duke had all of the journals. What was the connection?
Okay, my professor at Georgia State was John Matthews, a wonderful, wonderful professor. And he said, "You're going to have to find a great journal. You're going to have to really go find it." And his wife worked at the Woodruff Library at Emory. And I have to give his wife credit for knowing that this journal was at Duke. And see, when I met the great-granddaughter, Gail, she had given it to Duke. And for safekeeping and for posterity, so other people could use it. And it has been a valuable resource for historians through the years. As I say, because she writes about the conditions in Augusta and what Augusta was like when Sherman was on the way, and people were always interested in the battles in Sherman, you know, and different things that she said. Jeff, her husband, studies have been done about the impact of the Civil War on the men. See, the South thought they were going to win the Civil War just like that. And they were good soldiers, and we had good generals and all that business, but it didn't work out the way they had expected, and their life was just turned upside down, and they lost everything. Not only did they lose property, but they lost self-esteem, and what am I supposed to do with my life? And some of them, if they hadn't lost an arm or a leg, they were mentally impaired. And it was devastating. 700,000 people died in that war.
More than all the rest
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
war.
it was horrible. And it was such close combat. And you would see somebody sliced up beside you. I mean, how, anyway, so they have used him, and he's in the journal. And I will say this, part of the journal was destroyed. And we don't know what parts were destroyed, and we don't know who destroyed them. But Gail, her great-granddaughter, said, I saw Aunt Cora throwing some of it away one time. And I know that Jeff outlived Gertrude 7 years, and he lived with Cora. So she was probably protecting his reputation, something that she said about Jeff, because she was so honest. She talks about their excited conversations. That's how she talked about arguments, excited conversations. And she would talk about his drinking. And she got very active in the WCTU, which was the first real popular women's group after the war, you know, one of them. There was just a great flowering of groups for women after the Civil War because women wanted to help the orphans and the widows, and they wanted to form church groups, and then the church groups evolved into the Women's Christian Temperance Union. And then when the Women's Christian Temperance Union started talking about the vote, the churches would no longer allow them to meet in the churches because the Warren Candler of the Methodist Church said not only is suffrage not scriptural, it's sinful. And he was the bishop of the Methodist Church. And the minister Hawthorne of First Baptist Church said, any man that lets his wife participate in suffrage is feeble-minded. I mean, these were quotes. And I read Warren Candler's letter to Jane Sibley that's in the archives at Emory, where he said, not only is suffrage not scriptural, it's sinful. And Jane Sibley was president of the Georgia chapter of the WCTU at the time. So, very interesting.
I have a question. When they find the silver that they buried from the Yankees, and
Yes.
then is that a true story, or did you embellish that? Because they were
that's
admiring
good.
the
You've
silver
already read the
source.
book.
I have read it.
Yeah.
Yes, I have.
I know that she had tea parties, and I think I made that up.
Well, it was a good one.
I do know that the owners would bury their silver.
Yeah, yeah.
And they would bury treasures. And so I do know that that was a common practice, but I don't believe I don't know that Mary Clanton did. I don't think she did. But she did love to entertain and do tea parties, and she was upset that Gertrude showed no interest. She didn't want to learn to sew. And see, after the war and after emancipation, and they're broke, and Gertrude doesn't know how to cook, and she doesn't know how to sew. She had been waited on hand and foot, and she'd had cooks and servants and everything all her life, and all that was taken away, and they had to move out. They did move out to a farm, and she had to figure out how to do things. And, you know, she had to learn to live like the rest of us. But she did. Uh-huh.
As an author, I'm interested in your, any current projects that you might be working on?
Everybody always asks that. And that's a good question. I'm thinking about doing a memoir. And I've been really encouraged to do a memoir. Bill and I have said, now he's not dumb, but I've called him the Forrest Gump of football.
Oh my God.
Because when he was drafted to the Green Bay Packers, Vince Lombardi was the coach. And, well, we have so many Vince Lombardi stories and the Packer stories and going to the first Super Bowl and all that. Then he ended up with the old Baltimore Colts, and we went to Super Bowls, and Snap the Ball to Bart Star and Johnny Unitas and all that stuff. But in the meantime, we met a lot of celebrities, and I'll tell y'all the best story. Should I tell them that best story of Sammy Davis? I told this to my cousin the other day, and she's like a sister to me, and she said, Carolyn, why have you never told me that story? I said, well, it never came up. And she says, oh, you've got to write about it. You've got to tell it. It's so interesting. Bill used to help out with the Special Olympics when he was, after he played and when he played. And then I think when you worked
That's
with
while
him,
I was playing.
you still played. And Ethel Kennedy came to Atlanta and asked him to come out to the Special Olympics. So we both went and helped out with Special Olympics. And then Ethel wanted to invite us to go down the Colorado River on the 4th of July and ride the rapids. And I'm saying, oh, God, I'd never done that. But anyway, to make a long story short, Bill said, we'll never hear from her, and don't worry about it. A couple of weeks later, Ethel calls, and or somebody from her office, and said, the Colorado River trip is off, but we're going to go to Hyannisport. And y'all are invited to spend the weekend of the 4th of July at Hyannisport with the family. Bring your children. So we took our little girl, and Kristen was maybe
3.
a little, she was little. And we left our baby boy at home, and we go to Hyannisport, and we stay in Ethel Kennedy's house. And Rose Kennedy's in her house, and everybody plays touch football, and Ted Kennedy would come over. We're meeting all the Kennedys, but the story that I told my cousin that she'd never heard, Ethel loved to go sailing. Well, we didn't know anything about sailing. I'd never been on a boat like that. And Bill hadn't either. Well, Ethel's giving Bill's instructions on do this and do that, and he's trying to do it. And it was really rough. So we go back and take the kids back to the dock because they're getting sick. And Sammy Davis was there because we had picked up Sammy Davis at Saratoga. He had been performing it, and Burt Bacharach was there too. And so Sammy Davis and I are about the same size. We were then. I'm probably bigger now. But anyway, Ethel says, the bow of the boat is going up so high. Carolyn, you and Sammy crawl into the bow of the boat and wake down the bow because it's going up too high. So Sammy Davis and I go crawl up on our hands and knees into the bow of the boat, and we're sitting there cross-legged looking at each other, and he's about a foot from me, and he's got one glass eye, and he doesn't like it. He doesn't even know how to swim. He's saying, oh, I hate this. Oh, no. And he was laughing. It was great. He was so wonderful. But he was laughing, and he took Bill and me in like we were long-lost friends. But I never will forget sitting in the bow of the boat with Sammy Davis. That's a good story.
And Ethel made him sing Candy.
Oh, yeah. And Ethel, we're out in this rough boat, and Ethel would say, sing Candyman. Sing Candyman. Sammy sang Candyman. And his wife got sick and threw up off the side of the boat. This is all true. I couldn't make this up. But anyway, stuff like that happened to us, and that's one of the best ones, though. But like I say, my cousin said, why didn't you ever tell me that story? I said, well, it just never came up. But you're just thrown with so many people, and you see so many things. And then, of course, we've had all the highs and we've had all the lows. We've had great experience with players, and we've had players shot and players commit suicide. And everything that can happen seems like has happened to us in this crazy life. But it's been a blessing, and we have so many friends, and we have survived it, and we still love each other. And
62 years.
62 years. On December the 15th, it will be 63. We got married as children. No, we're getting up there. But they say you keep moving. So, okay. Back in the back.
How long did it take you to write the book?
Which one?
Well, in general, what's the average length of time that you
Okay, I want to tell you, one thing I was going to tell you that I didn't tell you, because I can't tell you everything. I wrote my dissertation, and then it was 300 pages, and set it on a shelf for 20 years. I had already worked on that probably 10 years. I mean, I don't know, doing all that research, and I'm taking courses, and I've got 2 children, and my husband's a football coach, and I'm going to football games, and you know, my life gets in the way sometimes. So I just did it piecemeal.
Tell them how many football games.
We figured out I'd gone to 700 football games. So anyway, I was busy. So I put it on a shelf, and I said to somebody, I'm an accidental writer. I didn't plan to be a writer. And I had a dear friend who had gone to Wesleyan, and she heard about my dissertation. She wanted to read it. And then she said, oh, I've got to take you to Wesleyan. I want you to meet the president down there. And I ended up being the convocation speaker for their 175th anniversary. Wow. It's a great honor for me. And I told all these things that Gertrude had said about Wesleyan when she went, and how special it was to her. And everybody was coming up to me wanting to read my book. And I said, oh, I've never published it. I'm not a tenure track professor. See, if you're a tenure track, you have to publish to get tenure. But we had moved around the country, and I'd worked in historical preservation. I had done my foundation. I had done a lot of things and stayed busy, but I didn't have to publish, so I hadn't. So they forced me to publish, and that was 10 years ago. And then during COVID, I'd had these 2 yellow legal pads that Annelle referred to on a shelf for, I don't know how many years, 20 years, not 20, many, many years, and that I had started in Hawaii when Bill was working for ESPN. That's another story. He had to go to Hawaii every January, and I had to go with him because that was tough. That's right. So I would go to, now every January I think, we're supposed to go to Hawaii. Why don't we go to Hawaii every January anymore? But that was great fun. But anyway, he would be working, and I didn't have anything to do. When you read Sudden Death, there's a lot of Hawaii in that book. And that's the reason, because we were in Hawaii when I started it. And my protagonist, the man, is from Hawaii, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, that was my COVID. And that probably maybe took when you think about how long it stayed on the shelf. And then during COVID, I took it off and put it on a Word document and then added to it for about 6 months. And then my new book, it probably took me a couple of years. And then if I'm going to do this memoir, I got to get with it.
Are these books on Audible? Or?
Well, guess what? I have done an Audible of it, but it's not out yet. But I'll let you know. Really, I don't know. I should have gotten everybody on my email list. Sudden Death is going to come out soon. Sudden Death is my murder mystery set in the world of football, and I have recorded it. It's in my voice.
Oh, that'd be great.
Because my Kindle in that book is a Southern lady with a Southern accent, so hey. And then Trudy, you know, all my women in here are Southern, so I figured I could do it. And I've already recorded it, but we have to edit it, and it takes a long time to make sure everything's perfect. And but I do think Sudden Death will be out soon, and so many people say they love audiobooks. So I'll announce it on Instagram and Facebook, and Annelle will have to tell you and somehow. But however you announce those things. But I'm on Dr. Carolyn Curry. If you want to see the video we made out there, I'll post that. And some of the other ones I've made in the past have been a lot of fun. Great. Thank you.
All right, thanks, everyone. Let me see if I have any. Carolyn, if you and Bill want to make your way
Yes,
out
we
to
will.
the signing table, and Annelle and her husband Jim will be out there signing books, or selling books, while